Welcome everyone to the CONTEC Exec Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Zimmerman. Today, I've got my friend Landon Messal of SiteMarker here. Landon, now we've already had several conversations, but I'm glad you're here today. I'll finally get you on the podcast. We're going to talk and just, chat about what in the world is going on with our phases overlapping. How are things, man?
Things are great, man. We've had so many good conversations. I'm glad to finally record this one and spread the word. 2026 is off to a really great start for us. And, I certainly think that it's going to be a pretty compelling conversation, kind of bringing the land development as a whole perspective into, what you're seeing, particularly at the trade and the construction side of things. It's going to be pretty interesting. I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just clue everybody in on what you do at SiteMarker, kind of how we kind of got started down this road. Let's talk just a little bit about SiteMarker and what is it that SiteMarker does, and you start to recognize these industry issues.
Yeah, so my background is a civil engineer, was director of innovation for an engineering firm, and SiteMarker was born out of that engineering firm. So we've got a ton of knowledge and experience within land development. And for those that don't know what land development is, that's taking a raw piece of land and making sure that there's infrastructure, sewer, water, drainage, and roads that can then support vertical construction. And so, having been in the industry and now, taking SiteMarker to the market, we've got a really keen perception of what the challenges are out there, and with respect, and we'll dive into this a bit deeper, of really that one of the main challenges we have is knowing where we're at, documenting what we saw, and then telling other people where we were and what we saw. And so for that reason, SiteMarker has approached solving that in a much different way. So most of the industry is very document-based. The Procores, the ACCs, Bluebeam, you take information, put it on a document. SiteMarker is a map-based platform, and we take that document and put it on a map. And that allows you to collect a lot of information, some of which we're going to talk about here today with respect to construction velocity and understanding, our ability to at certain rates. It allows us to collect a lot of information that otherwise can't get collected and curated within more document and cumbersome systems.
Okay. So the big moment for you, I guess, there's obviously something. I always say people got to be crazy to be in this business, but even now, like in the CONTEC world, what was the kind of the aha moment that said, we got to do this better? Is it a culmination of moments, or was it, what was it?
It was a culmination over several years where multiple personas within the firm that we were at. So we had, construction managers, civil engineers, landscape architects, all really kind of having this challenge of going to the field, collecting information, and either disseminating it internally for design purposes or, creating a report to send it out to other project stakeholders. So again, as the director of innovation for that firm, we did an audit on what systems we were using to currently solve that problem. And it was something like 15 different programs: Google Earth, Word, Excel with macros and photos on our phone, handwritten notes. And so we set out to go find the solution, and we looked for it for probably a year, tried a number of different solutions. And then we just set out to kind of see what it would look like if we built it. So we wireframed it, we created an MVP. And then once we had that MVP in our hands, we decided, hey, listen, we're onto something here. And we spun that out and took it to the market.
Good. So in order to get kind of clear on, what we were talking about earlier, is like, projects overlap, the phases overlap. We're building something. And this is, even in the AEC portion, we're starting to build something long before the plans for said building, kind of on my side of the world, are even done. And maybe we don't know kind of what's underground, or we've got a sort of an idea, but maybe we don't have the most updated set. This has kind of always been the case, right?
It's probably to an extent, and again, I hadn't been in the industry for 40 years, so I'd be projecting there, but I think to an extent, it's always been that case. I think that where we've gotten with litigation within the industry, that, historically, a phone call and relationships were able to overcome some of those nuanced challenges of updating plans, and you could work it out in the field, if you will. And that I think posture, that tone within the industry is very much changed. We still very much rely on relationships. to move projects forward. But I do think that particularly, in where I'm from here in Charleston in South Carolina, if you look at the land that's left in this area, it's not the best pieces of dirt anymore. And so we have more complex constraints on the site. We've got more complex and longer permitting, timelines. We also have, owners and contractors and really everybody's incentivized to get this project started and completed faster. And kind of collectively, what that ends up happening is instead of this nice linear process of identifying land and due diligence, getting a concept plan together, taking the property down, going into permitting, getting an IFC set and pricing the IFC set, then constructing it and closing it out, they've now started to overlap where we're creating early site packages to say, hey, roughly this is what it's going to look like. Mm-hmm. They've taken the property down. They're already starting kind of construction from the land clearing standpoint, while the design team's still figuring out what the final design looks like. And that happens, I'm afraid it ends up bleeding all the way into the middle of construction.
Well, and so it seems strange to me because I always look at it too. What happens when there's an uh-oh moment? We're a little bit over our skis. That's kind of in the gray area of a 80% plan or a 75% plan. What happens then?
That's where I think the stressors are within the industry right now. I mean, one thing I didn't bring up is, we're now pricing incomplete sets of plans that were submitted to, municipalities just to get the review process going. You're like, all right, we're going to get those plans out.
So this is the land plans, right? This is just the
groundwork planning. Well, yeah, not even vertical construction yet. I suspect it's happening in there too.
Yeah.
And the land planning, we submit a set of plans that we know is not quite complete yet. But we want to get into the process of getting comments back while we're still designing. Meanwhile, there's equipment moving dirt and putting utilities in the ground. And
is that just pressure? Is that pressure from clients? Is that just pressure from everywhere to, hey, we got to go get this done?
I think it's all around, honestly. I mean, I think it might be easy to point at the municipalities and having, understaffed with more complex projects being submitted. I do think too, I suspect that what has happened at the municipality level is that they're about to go take and own these assets in perpetuity, right? And so they've learned over the last 50 years what works and what doesn't. And so they've gone and kind of improved and put more rigor around what gets put into the ground and what's designed because they got to own it. And so that's putting more pressure on the design to be more curated, all while, everybody is trying to start construction and keep the project moving along at the same time. So I think it's just a bit of everything. I don't think there's one stakeholder you can point at.
Right. It's everybody's. Well, I do agree that it's everybody's push, right? The client obviously wants to get their job done. Everybody wants to collect the check kind of at the end of it all. When you're part of that process, or at least, collect your progress checks. But it just seems so strange to me that we continue to kind of go down this road of, hey, we'll just wing it. We got 75, 80% complete. We'll just kind of, but then when I look at what people always say, or what the statistics say about losses, and it's strictly due to what I'll say, call it data or just information. 28% in losses on most jobs, where it's a communication thing, like somebody didn't know something here or somebody didn't know something there, and it creates either change orders or rework, all those types of things. And it's like, why do we always seem to have, not enough time to do it right, but we have plenty of time to do it twice? I don't get it. I still don't understand that. I still don't understand that model. And then the gall to complain over the fact that, by the way, we've got an incomplete set of stuff. We've disseminated this to everybody because we're pushing this thing along. And then the gall to complain about the fact, well, why do we have change orders? Why do we have rework? What's all this about? This is crazy. You guys should know better. And that's me from being on the GC side of the world when they say, hey, why am I seeing this? You guys should have caught that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's, I would suspect it all comes down to money. One of our clients told us a week at the beginning of a project turns into a month at the end of it. And you could imagine, not getting that CO, not selling houses if you're in residential, that delays that return on investment 1 month, and those carrying costs can be incredible. And so it's like push ahead at all costs, whether we're going to do it twice or not, we're making progress. And, I suspect it has to do at the end of the day with money. But to your point, if you really kind of looked at the math of it, man, 28% seems like you might be able to just get the plan set right first, price that, go build it. I will point out, though, and this was a pretty devastating thing for me to learn early in my career. I was working with my first team leader, and we were doing some DoD work, and we had worked a ton on this set, in weeks, just late nights. And I was like, man, I'm just got to do one more thing. And let's just call this a 60% set. I don't remember exactly what it was. And he said, Landon, we could spend 6 months on this thing straight. And when we send these plans out the door, they're wrong. Excuse me? He's like, a construction never goes exactly to the plans. And that was like crazy to me. And It makes sense now. But, even if you put in a vacuum every single one of these stages of due diligence, taking the land down, design, permit, even if you put them in silos, I still think that there's just challenges that unfold into the field that are unavoidable. And I think part of what I really like about a lot of your content is we have yet to fully identify how to solve some of those challenges. I think we can potentially articulate them, but how do we predict them and keep them from happening, in the future? And I think that's where certainly SiteMarker, is a fantastic punch list tool, but it more and more it is a communication tool and being able to collect information that today we don't know if it's valuable, but it might be valuable in the future. It kind of goes back a bit to nobody decides to democratize data for the sake of democratizing it. We need to organize and collect information that keeps the project moving forward and is complementary to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, and what I've seen in a lot of your content is how do we take those steps forward such that we can then provide some insights into construction and land development that would help us be more efficient and reduce that 28% loss.
Well, you said the big word, right? Communication. It has all along been, and you can call it communication, you can call it data, whatever you want to call it. You can call it information. Again, communication basically states if I'm speaking one language and you're speaking another, we're not going to communicate probably very well, okay? So then that goes to kind of creating standards of communication. Now, construction is a complex world, right? From, like I said, kind of like you said, just from the land development, there's so many different levels just inside of that. And then we're trying to get into a build phase of the vertical section, right? And then, even beyond that, then we're trying to get into that closeout phase of we've got this done, permitting, commissioning, whatever you're building. If you're building data centers, we've got that commissioning point, and then final inspections and handoff, delivery. And then beyond that, whatever punch list items, carrying over anything that was in a change order that may now become part of the post scope of work, those types of things. If you're not speaking the same language, imagine how much more difficult all of those complex steps are. Mm-hmm. And so, and I do talk about data governance because I do believe that technology is it has a kind of construction and technology are at that inflection point. We've been at it for a long time, probably kind of button heads a little bit of how to do things. But if we're going to turn the corner on this, we're going to have to start agreeing on terms, the ways that we communicate, the words that we use, and kind of, again, to be able to make that common ground point to then be able to approach a problem the same way. And you and I talked about it when we were at lunch, and we talked about, well, if we're going to call it a staircase, you're going to call it a stairwell. You're going to call it, what are you going to call it? Are you going to call it a riser? Are you going to, the landing step? And that's just, for staircases, hand railings, all those kind of things. AI or a computer or some sort of thing only works on, common ground. You're going to give it junk information, whether using slang term or some term from some regional area or whatever. If you're going to use that, it may not be able to pull that out. So we've kind of got to get the idea of what's our common language, and we have to be very, very diligent from here on out how to put that all together so that our measurements work using technology.
I 100% agree with that. And I think the first step for everybody is to start organizing their information. I don't know if obviously you can't go from a spreadsheet into a Procore in one clip, or maybe you can, but that might be pretty painful. But I think if the industry is going to get to that point within your own company, you need to communicate the same way. LLMs, to your point, they have to have organized information. It's got to be consistent in order to provide insights. I mean, crazy statistic from McKinsey. Just 4% of the data in the AEC industry, a $13 trillion industry globally, is organized and accessible. Just 4%. That is mind-blowing to me. And I think if in phase one of this, people were to begin collecting information that can be organized and standardized within a firm, that then sets the stage possibly for LLMs to then begin to compare all of the different terms that are being used to kind of across the nation. And start to weave them together and then kind of make a kind of standard of this is what we call these things. I think some of the pushback I've seen within my industry and my role as somebody who developed standards within an engineering firm, part of the pushback is as a licensed civil engineer, as a licensed architect, there's a bit of nuance in our art that you bring to each project, and for standards can be perceived as inhibiting their own ability to be professionals, if that makes sense. And I think that's going to be some of the challenges there as well.
Yeah, I do agree in the whole art and science of construction, because there is to it in a way, and some people don't grasp that. And some people grasp it very, very well. They kind of think outside the box and come up with solutions maybe that other people wouldn't. Mm-hmm. Because they're not building to, or they're not thinking about, well, I'm going to be restricted by this and this. They would figure out ways, around it. Again, it gives it that human, I will say gives it that human touch. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about getting rid of the human touch here. But I am talking about kind of getting on a common ground just so that our data governance is, more efficient. Mm-hmm. And to your point, if you're a company right now, whether you're building construction or you're in the AEC space or whatever, your data is probably the most important thing that most valuable thing that you have in order to be able to move forward into what I call the age of AI. And if you can get that structured and organized and then continue on with it, you're going to be way ahead of the curve as we move forward. I must say, I give this advice to anybody. I don't care if you're a small contractor, if you're a mid-sized contractor, large-sized contractors, that's what they're doing. They're figuring out ways I need to be able to utilize data in order to be able to make decisions in the field. And for them, it's even harder, but at least they have the wherewithal, the divisions to do it.
Yeah, I think I would say since the onset of AI, whatever that date is, to today and likely the next couple of years, where firms will be focused is organizing data they have quick access to or even have. And a lot of that represents kind of back of house, in office, kind of financial modeling, maybe schedule building at the highest level, and things of that nature. And taking documents and kind of maybe standardizing those. We talked about at lunch, and certainly one of the primary focuses of SiteMarker is being able to go and collect information in the field such that decisions can be made off of that. And I'd be interested to kind of dive in a little bit there and ask you, what challenges do you see for those firms that are trying to, create better data governance? Like, where are the gaps that you see in construction in the field specifically?
Well, so the biggest gap that I would see is how much more are we going to put on the plate of the folks in the field? That's the largest gap, because right now, you've got a field superintendent out there who is he's working 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, and we could just take even these recent, data center projects, whatever they've got. They've got an 18-month timeline. Like, if you don't have something that's going to take something off of their plate, right, as far as from a technology standpoint to get things in, then it's probably not worth it for them. And there's a lag there. But you need that data, and you need it, for me, it's productivity. I think you need productivity data to order the feedback so you can get a weekly good estimate, at least get a good view of where you are. Solid back data from, a close representation from the field that says, hey, we're not going to make it if we keep this pace, right? Or, hey, we're going to be way ahead of something here. Maybe we can move something up, or maybe we need to slow down a little bit. That's the thing about kind of lean building is you don't necessarily want sometimes you can't just throw everything at it and say, the more work we do, the better we get, And I think that's kind of what a CPM schedule kind of dictates. Just throw everything about it so we can get everything out of the way so these critical path objects can get done. That's not logical, right? What's logical would be to say, how fast can you get this piece of work done? Okay, we get that piece of work done, and then how fast are we getting this done? And then put those two together and then align them so that we've got a flow. I saw it on a movie just the other night, and slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right?
That's what I told my daughter in golf last night. I said, loose muscles are faster than stiff muscles. So I agree with that.
Yeah. I think people don't realize that. Like, a lot of times we go charging into something, kind of full bore thinking it's that, hard work mentality. Yeah. Okay, yes, you're going to have to work hard, but you also, work smart. But again, smooth. It's, these transition points. How well are we doing so we can control? Todd Zabel and I talked about it. It's being able to control that flow. Where's your bottleneck? How are you trying to control that? Can you manipulate that bottleneck to get a little bit more, a little bit less out of something so that it controls the flow of work? And then that way, once you're able to control the flow of work and control it, now you're able to predict when you're going to get something done. And so, unfortunately, what's going on is we're not getting the data back from the field that's true numbers, that technology that a, LLM or something would then be able to crunch. And I don't even know if you need an LLM to do it. You could do it with Power BI, right? It's just putting something into kind of number form so that now you've got a tangible, validated piece of data.
Putting it in number form and getting it quickly, right? Correct number from 2 weeks ago is not nearly as valuable as a correct number from today. I think maybe to even reword a little bit. I mean, you're talking about being able to understand where we're at within how long it's going to take to get tasks done. And they're having a hard time predicting that consistently because they don't know their construction velocity or their production rate. And you said earlier, it's like you can't make a super complex tech stack because you're putting too much on their plate. And that kind of goes back to the comment I made where I think the systems need to complement the way people currently work, and or they need to be collecting data on their own, whether it's a tripod in the middle of the room calculating drywall getting put up or whatever it is. But particularly in the land development industry, that comment about not democratizing data for the sake of democratizing it, we've got to keep the project moving forward.
Yeah.
So that's go ahead.
They have to go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Not only your data governance has to be there, but if you're using an IoT type device out there in the field to try to track productivity or track something, there's a lot of agreements that have to be there within that communication data.
Yep.
Between that and the field. Obviously, an IoT device of some sort would be great to help you track, certain things. But then you get in the question of, well, what do you track? I'm always the one that says, you can't count the grains of sand on the beach, right? But you can track the items that are kind of most valuable, or the things that will tell you when multiple pieces of the job are done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't necessarily know if you're an electrical contractor, if you should be counting the conduit install, right? But I bet you can count the feet of wire that you're putting into conduit, right? And when that's off the reel and into the conduit, you can probably do that. That'll give you a pretty good idea of where you're at in a project.
Right.
But again, that's not for me to decide, but it is for folks who want to use real data and come up with these numbers that have to have some sort of accuracy. That is up for them to decide. And I just think that can gets kicked down the road every time because it seems like work. Mm-hmm. But if we want LLMs to work for us, if we want these big, we're investing trillions of dollars in these data centers. And for what? Because we're gonna not use the data, or we're gonna use some data that's, total trash and then still come up with the same wrong answers? That doesn't seem logical to me.
That's pretty interesting. I think I kind of want to pose a question for you because this takes me back to about 10 years ago. I'm an AutoCAD manager and we're building templates, particularly in Civil 3D. So on the land development side, your templates were gold. We didn't share anything we had learned, any cool things that we were doing in Civil 3D. We didn't share that information. It was like, this is mine and that this is our advantage in the industry. That has shifted, I think, significantly, where people, competitors, if you'll call them, are much more willing to sit together, like-minded individuals that are kind of managing the systems and share like, hey, this is kind of what we're doing, because ultimately we're not going to lose work or win work because we have better templates. We're going to win work because we've got great relationships and we execute our designs correctly. How do you think the industry as a whole moves forward? Because certainly somebody out there is tracking, linear feet of electrical wiring installed. That somebody's doing it. And do you think that there's got to be kind of a change in posture across the industry to be sharing this information and these workflows?
Yeah, I don't think any of this stuff is very secretive anymore. Just the dissemination of information across the internet and a kind of, I will say, logical deduction. You can type into your chat GPT like these days. Like I just did it the other day. Somebody had a cabinet. Somebody wanted me to build a cabinet, and I just went out and said, "Well, let's see what this says about it. See how it compared to my numbers." Man, it just gave me a work breakdown structure. It kind of gave me a materials list. It gave me everything, and it was pretty much spot on. Like again, I think the dissemination of information is certainly much larger in scale these days. Being able to access the information, it's there. But again, it's not about being able to use AI. It's being able to function in the world of AI, right? It's what actions do you take afterwards with the information that you get? And so do you know if that information is correct? See, obviously for my little cabinet build, I had to do my own work and then compare it to what, AI would say. It's pretty close. Okay. But then for me, that was, my build, but somebody else might build something a little bit differently, may have a different little piece of process. And I know this is a very, very small example. All right. But this scales at any level, right? So you may be doing this gigantic project. Well, I don't necessarily know that I would rely on AI to be able to hit on every thing just based on basic information. You got to be specific. So for a company, I think, for them, their processes and their location and what they're doing, their data is very local to them, and it's very important to be local to them because there are certain factors that are going to come into play. I wouldn't take a Texas road crew and send them up to North Dakota and expect them to be as productive as they are in Texas. You can't use the same numbers. You can't use the same stuff. It's different weather. There's different ground. It's different soil. There's all these different factors. So you can't. It's not one size fits all. So you are, in the future, you're going to have to be very specific with your information and how you collect it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And certainly as we get to kind of, I think there's certainly regional and local nuances to anything there. And I think that's what's been really fascinating for me to kind of travel across the U.S. and work with engineering firms. I think fundamentally when I walk into any, engineering firm, they all feel exactly the same. I feel at home in them. But there's certainly nuances that are pressed upon them by municipalities and again, just, geological differences of soil types and things of that nature. And I would think that sharing best practices that are kind of fundamental, regardless of where you're at, is going to be extremely critical. Surrounding yourself with people that have worked with many companies like yourself, Robert, you are a consultant, and I'd imagine that you are sharing some of these best practices and then letting those teams kind of take that and make it their own. And we've done the same for SiteMarker, where we learn from our clients. We and help others understand, like, hey, this is a really great workflow that you should consider doing.
Yeah, well, again, you can lead a horse to water. You can't necessarily make him drink, right? But again, I think everybody as a whole, they're all looking for some of those best practice solutions, right? But again, it's much like utilizing AI. It's not about the information that you get back. It's what do you do with it once you have it? What decisions are you making with it? And do you know that those decisions are properly backed up by your information? Is your information valid? Again, it all goes together. It goes together, but one, you got that data governance section to know that we're all speaking the same language on said project, right? And then that folds across all of your projects as a company, right? Are we all speaking the same language? And then B, are we as we're speaking the same language, are we measuring properly from that data to get a logical answer as to I'm not talking about utilizing the complaint department of RFIs or anything like that. What I'm saying is, are we using this hard data to get real scientific numbers? We're dealing in a scientific environment here. This is science. Building is a science. It really is. And it's some art too, but they definitely go together. And so then once we do that, are we training our people to then utilize that? Are we training them up to say, this is how we talk about this? These are the words that we use, so that everybody's on the same page. So we know across the board that when we get this information from the field into whatever system we're using, I don't care if it's Power BI or if it's an LLM or whatever we're using, whatever technology, then it makes sense. And then we just reiterate that process. And that's what, again, best practices only provide best results when applied properly.
Man, this makes me we're assuming a lot of things here. And I think that there might be some people listening and saying, hey, this all makes sense, but I'm wondering, it assumes you've got leadership and a group of individuals that are willing to make decisions, that are capable of making the decision, capable of articulating the expectation of those decisions. I think an interesting thing with AI is that it is so mind-blowing initially to people, and they're like, holy cow, look what we can do with this. We can take a 300-page, investment, thesis and break it down and understand, where the risks are. And so that is motivating people to kind of get behind an initiative in ways that maybe their company had initially, not been able to. And I from a change management standpoint, I think we've seen the most success from our clients that have a strong leader in place that sets expectations and makes decisions from the information that we provide. Because to your point, there's really what's the value of switching systems or collecting information if you won't make decisions from it, if there's not ramifications for following those protocols of collecting information.
Yeah,
so I think an interesting concept to kind of maybe explore a bit is change management within leadership or within a firm.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we could probably do a whole nother podcast on the change management portion, which we may do. I don't know, we're going to do this, but the change management portion is huge for every company. Everybody has this approach, but we know specifically that change management requires one, executive sponsorship, meaning your executives cannot be disengaged. Mm-hmm. It's not just a hand-down process. You've got to be involved. This is probably, especially in the age of AI, which I like to call it, it is the most important thing that you can do is being engaged into what this change looks like for you, because it's going to impact everything that you do. Obviously, we've seen early things being able to, it's a great research tool, AI, being able to break down that 300-page document, and you've got access to seeing risk points, right? And seeing that immediately. That's great. Same thing with like RFIs, when you've got 1,000 pages of RFIs and trying to figure out which one's going to impact you the most. I don't mean to bag on it all the time, calling it the complaint department, but again, there are great uses for it. I think that's the low-hanging fruit. And good, you can apply it there to the low-hanging fruit, but that low-hanging fruit's not going to save you from things like being 2 weeks and lagging information from the field. Okay, so you've got to tackle those hard problems as well. Again, executives got to be engaged in that. There's got to be a team of people who become your product champions, right? And then you've got to do your due diligence on every part of that. There is a whole, change management is a whole field of here's how we're going to approach this. This is how we're going to do this. And getting everybody on board to that is the same as trying to get everybody on board as using IoTs in the field, or getting field guys to put in information, or getting the office folks to do this extra work over here to get this done. A lot of times when I was being as a solutions engineer, I was telling people, well, you got to have to work this in parallel, which to them triggered this idea, oh, you mean I'm going to have to do everything twice to be able to compare the two? And yes, is exactly what's going to have to happen. I know you don't want it to happen, but guess what? If you're going to compare something, that means you're going to have to probably do it twice in order to get an accurate information. Nobody wants to hear that. And so those are difficult conversations, or uncomfortable conversations they have to have, but that's where we are, right?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to think that AI is putting pressure on the industry to be better change managers, because it can be game changing if you approach it correctly. And if you're still over here struggling to get culture initiatives or employee handbooks out, or heck, even get your AutoCAD templates, everyone to agree on what a set of drawings should look like, you're going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to data governance from an AI standpoint. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies accelerate that have great culture, decision-making, change management, strong leadership. And the ones that don't, I suspect you'll see them kind of take a little bit more time to get there.
Yeah, you're going to see folks. We're going to see folks rise to the challenge. We're going to see companies rise to the challenge, and it'll show it. But I think it goes back to your original point was, communication. Just like we need to communicate better about a project, we need to communicate better about our change management process and why we're changing, why we have to do this. I personally think that all signs lead to the fact that if we're going to start putting AI or some sort of technology that helps us think better or think faster, if we're going to put it in the forefront, then we're going to have to be very, very clear about how we get there and why we get there and who it impacts and how we're going to use it, right? Or and then everybody else is going to, everybody that's around you, whether that's if you're a GC, it's your subcontractors and your specialty contractors, they're going to have an AI system that then communicates with this person's AI system. We're going to have to get to some level of, otherwise it's worthless. Or it creates just as many errors, just amplified, as it did when we got this whole thing started. Again, so you see what I'm saying? Is if we don't come to a common ground on exactly what we're talking about here across the board, as we try to elevate this process, again, it's going to have to be logical, and we're going to have to, and logic says we have to start from the same, basis. We have to start from the same foundation.
I would imagine from a trade perspective, oftentimes I think GCs tend to work or try to work with the same trades. They're going to be leaning on relationships and known communication patterns and quality of work, today. I would imagine those trades that are at the forefront and also willing to maybe be guided versus being potentially hard-headed to say, this is exactly what we're doing and here's our information, do with it what you will, versus, hey, here's our 3 primary GCs that we work with. How can we collect information that better serves them? I would imagine that's going to ultimately result in more work for them and growth opportunities.
Yeah. And again, you don't want to get it to a situation where you find yourself tied to that. As a GC, one of the things the reason you put jobs out to bid is to find out where you're going to get maybe sometimes your better trades, maybe get a better price, maybe find a difference in how they approach something and why maybe there's a new kid on the block, right? That's now advanced into the situation, and they're able to do this by utilizing not only technology but their field force to really kind of knock it out of the park. Like, we've got a little bit different approach, and here's how we do it. Well, you want to be able to use that, and you want to be able to communicate that level, because then, kind of like that high tide, rises all boats. Everybody, then that competition creates better product. It just creates better outputs. I don't care if it's better product, better service, better attitudes, those types of things. It just does. And so, yeah, we've got a lot. There's so much out there that challenges. I think, to your point, we're talking as, you're going to have data integrity, right? Then that, again, it all starts with that, especially in this technological world that is now melding with the construction world. There's just certain rules we're going to have to start to follow.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I think again, and there's just so many different stakeholders for this to buy into it, and so much change that needs to happen. While AI feels like it's moving incredibly fast, I still feel like there's a long road ahead to getting to kind of unified systems where we're speaking the same language. One might argue we're speaking the same language right now, but we're in different rooms, possibly, and the movement of information where it belongs. And that's kind of one of our ethoses, is like, we want to be an elite field data collection tool and put the information where it belongs, whether that's in Procore or ACC build. And I'd like to think that's us trying to, A, speak the same language through APIs, and then B, let's speak the same language in the same room to move that project forward.
Well, having seen the product that you showed me, I think you guys are on the right track when it comes to that, because I do believe you're right there. I think you're talking the right language, especially when you're talking the API language. Again, I'm not a computer guy, really, but I kind of understand, the formats and how it should all start to go together. I'm more in the business of, these are the things we need to look at. On the human side of the world, this is how we need to be, I guess, a bit more human in thinking about how we do this to advance our goals. Not to advance AI goals, but advance human goals. Build better, maybe build a little faster, be better at utilizing technology for productivity needs. But that is going to require some changes in our own processes. We can't always do it the same way we've been doing it. And it's just because we've combined kind of two industries, like technology and construction, going together. We see the challenge. That's why it's a big buzzword. We see the challenge. There's a lot to solve in here. So we need thinkers that can get out there. And then we also need the doers that still get out there and build. But, 45 minutes goes really, really fast around here when we start talking about this stuff. But Landon, man, it's great having you on. We're going to do this next week. You and I are going to sit back down and talk. And I think maybe we'll dive a little bit more into what we were talking about, that change management area, and kind of see what that looks like for y'all.
Robert, I appreciate you having me on. I think we could talk for a couple more hours, and I'll definitely hit you up the next time I'm in town.
Yeah, that'll be great. Landon, before we go, everybody, I want you guys to check out SiteMarker. What is that web address, Landon?
We're at www.sitemarker.com.
It's easy. SiteMarker.com. Go to it, check it out. It's really, really cool software. Have Landon or his folks give you guys a demo what that looks like if you're in the AEC industry. It's really a remarkable piece, and I can tell you for sure it could really help you. So go check that out. But until next time, everybody, be safe out there. We'll talk to you real soon.